During the next few days, Garrett seemed to push his student even harder than before. He began to realize that through her personal convictions and practice within the city, Guinevere had greatly improved her dexterity. So much so, that the thief no longer found it necessary to instruct her in the ways of stealth, but rather decided to begin the final stages of her training.
Tonight, I'm going to teach you something new.
The thief reached behind him and pulled free his bow. Guinevere watched him as he lined up an arrow with a straw-filled dummy across the room.
Lesson 7. A good thief never ceases to hone his or her skills. One day, Guinevere, your training with me will end, but you must never stray from the lessons that I have taught you, nor discontinue your studies. I've been a thief since before you were born, and I still work to better myself each and every day. To be successful, to stay alive, you must do the same.
Guinevere listened and nodded. It made her sad to think about the inevitable truth, that her place with Garrett was only temporary, and that one day she would be on her own within this city. One day, she would carry out her own jobs, make her own contacts like Barso, and warrant her own wanted posters. And she would most likely never see, or even hear from Garrett again.
I understand.
Good. Tonight's training will be like nothing that I have guided you through thus far. It will push you to the very limits of your endurance and bravery. It will make you question everything that you may think in terms of our student and teacher relationship.
Garrett faced her, growing slightly uncomfortable in light of his recent dream the night before.
This is to be your last lesson with me, Guinevere. If you pass the 2 tests that I'm about to administer to you, then you shall be accompanying me into the House of Blossoms. After which...
He hesitated, the words refusing to come. Guinevere smiled and kindly finished for him.
I'll be on my own.
Yes,
Garrett affirmed. There was a long silence between the two, before the thief cleared his throat.
I know that you're adept at using your magic, which is why I do not feel the need to work on your aim, Guinevere. I just want to get you used to practice.
With that, Garrett pulled back his bowstring and let the arrow fly. It implanted itself within the head of the dummy across the room. Guinevere smirked.
Impressive.
Now, it's your turn.
Garrett instructed. The young woman nodded, planting both feet firmly on the wooden floor. She summoned her power, focused her sights on the dull, lifeless eyes of the mannequin, and unleashed a spell. The earthy hues of green and gold dashed forward, sending light into even the deepest regions of the clock tower. Rats scattered in its wake, and overhead, a few lone ravens flapped their dirty wings in protest. The spell found its target with a loud clash, before scattering off into all corners of the dark tower like frightened mice. Guinevere looked up at her teacher for a sign of approval, but he seemed distracted.
Very good, Guinevere. Never neglect even the most basic of training, for even the most basic of parlor tricks can prove useful in the right circumstances.
Guinevere smiled, and watched as her teacher slid his bow back within the confines of its quiver. Then turning abruptly, he faced Guinevere. It had now been exactly 2 months since the master had met his apprentice. He looked his star pupil up and down. She had done well over the last month. The thief gave her a contented smile. The young woman had surpassed every goal he had for her. She had done him proud. Now, only one last test remained. A method that would help ease some of his personal concerns. He took and held a long breath. Garrett knew the City Watch, and he knew them well. Even if Master Simmons had instructed Guinevere returned to him alive, those beef-headed brutes had a sadistic tendency to play rough with their blades. A fact that several long scars on the thief's upper back could well attest to. Back in his earlier days of thieving, he had gotten caught trying to rob the home of a well-to-do noble, and consequences had ensued. Consequences that had barely allowed him to leave with his life in tow. Garrett couldn't allow such fates to befall his Guinevere.
Guinevere, tonight, I am not Garrett. I am a man who wants to attack and possibly kill you for whatever reason. I may even want to rape you. You don't know what I intend. You only know that I am your enemy. Now defend yourself.
Guinevere gasped silently. His features took on a fierceness that startled her, and his hazel eye glinted with malice. Even his false optics seemed to be looking into her, out to get her. Without waiting for her to respond, the thief launched himself towards her. Guinevere was taken aback as Garrett hurled himself against her, driving them both to the floor. Instinctively, she fought back. She wildly flailed her arms and legs in attempts to dislodge him. He kept her pinned and gave her no quarter. One of his fists seized a handful of her hair to immobilize her head, and the other tore at her belt. Guinevere shrieked in fear and outrage. Suddenly, she was able to wriggle a knee free from his legs and brought it up fiercely into his abdomen, trying to stop him. He grunted, but did not move off of her. It wasn't enough. She twisted, thrashed, and finally she sank her teeth into Garrett's face. He cried out as blood spurted from his cheek. Guinevere used her momentary advantage to shove him off of her and roll atop him. She pressed her palm into his throat and glared down at him.
I'll use my flesh skinner spell. You'll die horribly.
She panted threateningly.
Before you can even think to recover.
He gave a raspy laugh, the sound ragged and labored. But it was a genuine laugh.
Very good, Guinevere. You need to practice. But for your first time, you did well.
He complimented.
Remind me to never make you angry.
Guinevere smiled. He was no longer her enemy, but rather her thief once more. She released him and got to her feet, offering him her hand to assist him to his.
Are you alright? I didn't want to hurt you, but you told me to.
The young woman cooed, and silently brought up her fingers and dabbed at the blood on his face. Garrett tensed.
I'm fine, Guinevere. Thank you.
He murmured, his eyes carefully scrutinizing her.
You did what you had to.
Guinevere wanted so badly to rush to him, to hug him, to apologize. But she knew that he did not want that. He was teaching her. Still bleeding, Garrett smiled. A strange sadness overtook him as he realized what this meant. Guinevere would be on her own from here on out, and he would have his clock tower back again. And while he would normally feel happy over such things, this just made him feel odd. The young woman was still watching him, no doubt racked with guilt for having been forced to harm him. Garrett's face softened as he wiped away the last of the blood from his wound.
Guinevere, come here.
He beckoned, as he gazed deep within her eyes, greener than any emeralds that he had ever had the pleasure of pilfering. His heart rate quickened as his breathing grew silent. Those emeralds were not for anyone's taking. They were simply here for him to look at and enjoy. The young woman did as she was bade. Rather clumsily, Garrett took her in his arms and hugged her softly. Guinevere gaped and felt her knees weaken. The entire event seemed unreal. He held tightly to her, inhaling her sweet floral fragrance. A burning sensation found him once more, as Garrett fought against the silent urges as they teased the very corners of his soul. Slowly and reluctantly, he let her go. But their faces were still close.
What was that for?
Guinevere asked, her voice barely over a whisper.
Not that I'm complaining, mind you.
She added quickly. The corner of Garrett's mouth twitched in amusement at her adorable antics, his demeanor lighter than it had been in days.
Among other things, it was a reward.
He replied in a deep, solemn tone.